He's beating my mum, save her. A little black girl begged the Korean Mafia boss. What he did next will leave you speechless. The automatic doors of Daryang Mall opened with a soft mechanical sigh that evening. Warm light spilling onto the gray pavement like liquid gold against gathering darkness. The air carried that peculiar soul chill. The kind that sharpened everything, made sounds crisper, made breath visible. Black sedans waited in perfect formation near the entrance. Engines humming with the deep, expensive purr of German engineering. They weren't parked. They were positioned. Men in tailored suits stood beside them, still as statues but alert as wolves, their eyes constantly moving, scanning reflections in glass and chrome, reading the environment like a language only they understood. They weren't here to shop. They were here because Chairman Kang Min-jae never arrived anywhere without control already established, without escape routes mapped, without every variable accounted for. Chairman Kang Min-jae stepped from the lead vehicle with the unhurried grace of someone who'd learned that power doesn't rush. He adjusted the cuff of his black suit, Italian wool, hand-stitched, worth more than most people's monthly salary. His hair was slicked back with surgical precision, not a strand out of place, the faint outline of tattoos creeping above his collar like secrets trying to escape. Marks earned long before money replaced violence as his primary weapon. Behind him, 4 men moved into tactical formation without being told, without gesture or word. Not bodyguards. Extensions of his will. The mall buzzed with ordinary life. Families navigating strollers. Couples window shopping. Teenagers laughing too loud, taking selfies, living in that bubble where consequences seemed optional. None of them noticed the way the air subtly shifted when Min-jae arrived, the way security guards straightened, the way certain shopkeepers looked away. Power rarely announced itself with fanfare. It simply occupied space and expected everything else to adjust. That was when he heard it. The scream. Not loud at first. Not the theatrical kind from movies. Just raw. Human. Desperate. Please. Somebody help me. Min-jae's head turned with predatory precision. A little black girl burst from between 2 parked cars like something fleeing wildfire. Barefoot on cold concrete that must have felt like ice against her skin. Her pink dress was torn at the hem, the fabric dark with stains that definitely weren't rain, too rust-colored, too visceral. One sleeve hung loose from a ripped seam, exposing a thin shoulder marked with bruises. Her hair was unbraided, clumped with sweat and dust, wild around her face like she'd been fighting or running or both. She ran straight toward him. Straight toward the most dangerous man in a 100-meter radius. One of Min-jae's men stepped forward instinctively, hand moving inside his jacket. Sir. Min-jae raised a single finger. Stop. The man froze. The girl stumbled, her exhausted legs nearly giving out before she caught herself with a desperate lunge forward. When she reached Min-jae, she didn't have the sense or the strength to stop. She crashed into his legs like a ship hitting shore and clutched his coat with small fists, grabbing Italian wool like it was the only solid thing left in a world that had turned to quicksand. He's beating my mum, she sobbed, the words tumbling out between gasps that tore from her chest. Please, he won't stop. He locked the door. She's screaming, please, please, please. The parking lot went silent. Even the ambient mall noise seemed to fade, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Min-jae looked down at her small hands fisted into his coat. Her knuckles were scraped raw, bloody from clawing at something, or someone. There were finger-shaped bruises wrapped around both her thin arms, dark purple marks ringed with sickly yellow at the edges. Old ones. Healing ones. This wasn't her first time running. This wasn't her first time begging for help. This wasn't panic. This was patterned fear. What's your name? He asked, his voice quiet, controlled, carrying no emotion whatsoever. Amara, she cried, her whole body shaking. Please. He said if I ran he'd kill her. He said he'd. Her voice broke completely, dissolving into sobs. Min-jae's gaze lifted slowly, deliberately, scanning the mall facade like a sniper reading terrain. Who is he? My mum's boyfriend, Amara gasped. He's inside. 3rd floor. The apartment above the shops. Please, she stopped screaming. Why did she stop screaming? Above the shops. Illegal rentals. Cash-only units converted from storage space. No official records. No inspections. The kind of place people disappeared into when they had nowhere else to go. Min-jae knew the type. He owned buildings with similar arrangements. One of his men leaned in close, voice low and urgent. Boss, we should call police. No, Min-jae said quietly. The word ended the discussion like a door slamming shut. He crouched in front of Amara, bringing himself eye level with her, his expensive suit creasing on dirty concrete. Up close, he could see more details. The split lip, recently healed. The way she held her left arm slightly closer to her body, protecting ribs that had been hurt before. The resignation mixed with her desperation. The look of someone who'd learned that adults don't usually help. You did the right thing, he said, his tone shifting slightly, still controlled but somehow softer. You ran to the first person you saw who looked like he could help. Her lip trembled. Tears carved clean lines through the dirt on her face. Are you bad? The question hung in the air. Min-jae considered it. Considered the weight of honest answer versus comforting lie. Yes, he said simply. But not today. He stood, movements fluid and final. Find the unit, he told his men, the command carrying absolute certainty. Now. They moved instantly, no hesitation, no questions. Min-jae shrugged off his suit jacket, $1,200 of Italian craftsmanship, and wrapped it around Amara's shoulders. It swallowed her small frame completely, hanging past her knees like a protective cocoon. She clutched it with both hands, pulling it tight around herself like armor against the world. Stay with me, he said, already walking toward the mall service entrance with the purposeful stride of someone who'd breached 1,000 doors. You're not going back alone. The elevator ride up was silent except for Amara's breathing. Shallow. Counted. Controlled. Like she was afraid to use too much air. Like she'd learned that making noise attracted attention, and attention brought pain. 3rd floor. Corridor C. The numbers glowed red above the elevator door. They heard the shouting before the doors even opened. A man's voice, slurred with alcohol, loud with the confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable. The unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting flesh, a sickening thud that echoed down the narrow corridor. A woman's cry, sharp and then suddenly cut short, strangled, like she'd learned that screaming only made it worse, that resistance only prolonged the beating. The elevator door slid open. Amara froze, her whole body going rigid. That's him, she whispered, her voice so small it almost disappeared. That's the door. Min-jae didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He didn't give warning. He kicked the door open with a single controlled strike, his leg moving with the precision of someone trained in violence, the lock splintering, wood cracking, the door slamming inward and bouncing off the interior wall. Hey, before we continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone you care about. It really helps the channel grow. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is on your end. Alright, let's get back into the story. The apartment was chaos. Furniture overturned. A lamp shattered on the floor, its shade crushed, the bulb's filament still glowing orange among the broken glass. In the center of the room, a woman lay curled on her side, arms raised in futile defense, blood streaking from her lip and down her chin. Her eye was swelling shut, purple and angry. The man turned, startled, bottle still gripped in his hand like a weapon he wasn't quite done using. Who the hell? Min-jae's fist broke his sentence. The impact was surgical. Precise. The man's head snapped back, the bottle flying from his grip and shattering against the wall in an explosion of glass and cheap liquor. He staggered backward, shocked more than hurt, his alcohol-soaked brain struggling to process what was happening. What is this? He slurred, blood starting to drip from his nose. You can't just. Min-jae didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. You put your hands on a woman, he said calmly, each word measured like a surgeon's cut. In front of her child. The man's eyes darted past Min-jae to where Amara stood frozen in the doorway, still wrapped in the expensive suit jacket. Something like recognition flickered across his face. Then rage. She's mine, he spat, straightening up with false bravado. This is my house. You don't know who I am. You don't know who I work for. Min-jae smiled. That was the wrong sentence. The men behind him moved in with synchronized precision. No dramatic ruse. Nos chautid commands. Just 3 professionals executing a familiar protocol. One moved to Amara's mother, checking her vitals. Another swept the apartment, opening closets, checking for weapons, for exits, for witnesses. The third positioned himself at the door, phone already out, fingers moving across the screen. What followed wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was precise. Efficient. The abuser swung wildly, alcohol making him slow and stupid. Min-jae caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted, and the man dropped to his knees with a sound that was half gasp, half sob. A knee to the ribs. An elbow to the jaw. Every strike measured. Every movement final. Amara buried her face into Min-jae's coat sleeve. He placed a hand on her head without looking down, steady and immovable. "Don't look," he said quietly. "You won't need to remember this part." When it was over, the man lay face down on the floor, wrists zip-tied behind his back, face swollen, breathing shallow but alive. Blood pooled beneath his broken nose, spreading across cheap linoleum. Min-jae crouched beside him, close enough that only the abuser could hear. "You have 5 seconds to tell me who you work for," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "After that, my patience expires and you won't enjoy what comes next." The man groaned, trying to turn his head. "Go to hell." Min-jae pressed his thumb into the man's shoulder. A pressure point that sent lightning through damaged nerves. The abuser screamed. "For seconds." All right. The words came out in a desperate rush. "I run logistics. For Park Sung-ho. I move his girls. The illegals. He pays me to keep them quiet, keep them hidden in units like this one. Cash only. No records." Min-jae's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. Calculation. Park Sung-ho. A mid-level trafficker. Someone Min-jae had heard whispers about but never bothered with directly. Small time. Beneath notice. Until now. "How many units?" Min-jae asked. 20. Maybe 30. I don't keep count." He moves them around. Different buildings. Different neighborhoods. Min-jae stood slowly, pulling his phone from his pocket. He typed a single message, sent it, then looked at the man bleeding on the floor. "You're going to give my associate every address," he said. "Every name. Every detail. And then you're going to disappear. If I hear you've surfaced again, if I hear you've gone near another woman, another child," he paused, "they won't find enough of you to identify." Behind him, Amara's mother stirred, consciousness returning in confused, painful waves. One of Min-jae's men knelt beside her. "She's breathing. Concussion, probably. Broken ribs. She needs a hospital." "No," Min-jae said. "No hospitals. No police reports. Call Dr. Yoon. Private clinic. Now." He turned to face the room, taking in the full scope of the illegal apartment. Water-stained walls. A single hot plate for cooking. One mattress for 2 people. This wasn't a home. It was a cage. And if this man worked for Park Sung-ho, if he managed dozens of units like this one. Min-jae's phone buzzed. A reply to his message. Park Sung-ho just became very interested in who broke into one of his properties. Min-jae looked down at Amara, still clutching his jacket, still refusing to look at the man who terrorized her. "You saved her," he said quietly. She shook her head violently. "You did." "No," Min-jae replied, crouching to meet her eyes. "You ran. That took more courage than anything I did here." In the distance, sirens began to wail, not for them, but the sound served as reminder. Time was moving. Decisions had consequences. And somewhere across the city, Park Sung-ho was about to learn that he'd made a very expensive mistake. The woman's breathing came in shallow, broken rhythms. Each inhale a victory, each exhale a small defeat. Dr. Yoon's hands moved with practiced efficiency, his latex gloves already stained dark as he examined her injuries under the harsh LED lights his team had set up. Portable equipment covered every surface of the cramped apartment. Monitors beeping softly, for bags hanging from makeshift hooks, medical cases spread open like emergency flowers blooming in chaos. She hadn't opened her eyes yet. Couldn't, probably. Her left one was swollen completely shut, the skin stretched tight and purple, the kind of injury that screamed repeated trauma rather than single incident. Her lip was split in 2 places, one fresh, one barely healed from last time. Blood matted her hair where her head had met something hard. Wall, floor, fist, the specifics didn't matter anymore. 3 broken ribs, Dr. Yoon said quietly, his voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen worse but wished he hadn't. Hairline fracture in her jaw. Severe bruising to the kidneys. Possible internal bleeding. I won't know until I get her to the clinic. He paused, fingers gentle against her throat, checking her pulse. She's been hit before. Multiple times. Old fractures in her wrist, partially healed. This wasn't a bad night. This was a pattern. Amara stood frozen against the wall, Min-jae's jacket still wrapped around her like a fortress that had already failed. Her eyes were locked on her mother's broken form, wide and unblinking, the kind of stare that came from watching your worst nightmare materialize in real time. I shouldn't have run, she whispered, the words barely audible. I left her. I left her alone with him. Min-jae turned to look at her, really look at her, and saw the guilt eating her alive from the inside. The same guilt he'd carried for years, the same poison that turned survival into shame. You did exactly what she would have wanted, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You stayed alive. You found help. That's not abandonment. That's strategy. But she stopped screaming. Amara's voice cracked. After I left, she stopped, and I thought. She stopped because she heard you get away. Min-jae interrupted, crouching to her level. She took the beating so you could run. That's what love looks like in war. Behind them, Dr. Yoon's assistant worked quickly, starting in 4-line hanging fluids, preparing the woman for transport. The boyfriend, still zip-tied, still bleeding, groaned from where he'd been dragged into the corner. One of Min-jae's men stood over him, expression blank, waiting for orders. The woman's eyes fluttered open. Just the right one, the left couldn't. Her gaze found Amara first, then traveled slowly, painfully to Min-jae. Recognition sparked, then confusion, then something that looked like resignation. You're the man from the parking lot, she rasped, each word costing her. Amara told me about the black cars. Grace, Amara sobbed, lurching forward. Grace, I'm sorry. Don't. Grace's hand lifted slightly, the movement costing her visible effort. Don't you dare apologize for saving us. Dr. Yoon checked his watch. We need to move her now. She's stable enough for transport, but that window is closing. Min-jae stood, nodding once. His men moved immediately, one clearing a path to the elevator, another calling down to prepare the vehicle. Grace would be moved to Dr. Yoon's private clinic across the city, a facility that asked no questions and kept no records the government could access. The boyfriend, Min-jae said, his attention shifting to the man in the corner. Tell me again who you work for. The man's swollen face twisted into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so broken. You don't get it, he slurred through blood and loose teeth. Park Sung-ho doesn't just run girls. He's connected. Russian syndicate. Bratva. They use Seoul as a pipeline, Europe to Asia. I manage their safe houses. Min-jae's expression didn't change, but his men exchanged glances. The Bratva. Not local crime. International infrastructure. You just kicked in a door that had Russian protection. The man continued, confidence returning now that he'd played his card. They're going to want answers. They're going to want. Min-jae's phone vibrated. A message from his second-in-command, 2 words that carried the weight of incoming storms. They know. The apartment fell silent except for the medical equipment's steady beeping and Grace's labored breathing. Min-jae looked at Amara, still clutching his jacket. At Grace, broken and bleeding on a stretcher. At the man who'd thought foreign backing made him untouchable. He'd violated an unspoken boundary tonight. Crossed a line that separated local operations from international entanglements. The kind of line that started wars. Get them out, he ordered. Both of them. The clinic. Private security. No visitors without my authorization. As his men moved to execute the command, Min-jae's phone vibrated again. This time a call. Unknown number. Moscow prefix. He answered without hesitation. The voice on the other end spoke Russian-accented Korean, smooth as expensive vodka and twice as deadly. Chairman Kong. We need to talk about the woman you just stole. The call lasted 47 seconds. Min-jae said nothing. Just listened as the voice, belonging to someone who called himself Dmitri, laid out the situation with the patience of a man explaining physics to a child. Grace and Amara were inventory. The apartment was infrastructure. Min-jae's intervention was theft. Restitution would be expected. We prefer to resolve these matters professionally, Dmitri concluded, his tone suggesting professionalism involved body bags. You have 24 hours to return our property. After that, we begin subtracting assets from your organization until the debt is paid. The line went dead. Min-jae stood in the now empty apartment, the scent of blood and cheap liquor still heavy in the air. Through the window, Seoul stretched out in glittering indifference, a city that had learned long ago not to ask questions about what happened in rooms like this one. His phone buzzed again. His second-in-command, Park Ji-hoon. We have tails. 3 vehicles. Rotating surveillance since you left the mall. They're mapping our routes. Then another message, this one from his head of security. The boyfriend is gone. Disappeared from transport. Our guys are checking dashcam footage now. Min-jae's jaw tightened. Not gone. Taken. The Bratva had extracted their asset before he could be properly interrogated. They were cleaning up loose ends, establishing dominance, sending a message written in the language of disappeared witnesses and severed communication chains. This wasn't retaliation yet. This was reconnaissance. Dr. Yoon's clinic occupied the 3rd floor of a building that officially housed an accounting firm and a yoga studio. The elevator required a keycard. The stairwell had cameras that fed to 3 separate monitoring stations. Every entrance was controlled, every visitor logged, every blind spot eliminated through expensive paranoia and hard-earned experience. Grace slept in a private room sedated, her breathing finally even and controlled. Monitors tracked her vitals with mathematical indifference. Heart rate steady, oxygen levels acceptable, the numbers that meant survival rather than recovery. Amara sat in a chair beside the bed, still wearing Min-jae's jacket, still refusing to leave. She'd been there for 6 hours, watching her mother breathe, counting each inhale like currency she was afraid would run out. Min-jae stood in the hallway outside, speaking in low tones with Ji-hoon. His second-in-command was a thin man with wireframe glasses and the demeanor of a university professor, which made people consistently underestimate how efficiently he could orchestrate violence. The Bratva operates independently here, Ji-hoon explained, tablet in hand, data scrolling past in neat columns. They're not competing with us, they're parallel infrastructure. Trafficking mostly. Eastern European girls coming through Vladivostok, African migrants moving through China. They keep it quiet, keep it separate. We've never interfered before. And now I've broken that protocol, Min-jae said flatly. Spectacularly. Ji-hoon adjusted his glasses. The question is whether we hand them back and apologize or we don't hand back victims. Then we're at war. The words hung in the sterile hallway like smoke that wouldn't dissipate. Inside the room, Amara shifted in her chair. She wasn't sleeping. Her posture was too rigid, her breathing too controlled. She was listening. Min-jae had noticed 30 minutes ago but hadn't said anything. Let her hear. Let her understand the cost of mercy. Ji-hoon lowered his voice further. Boss, respectfully, this isn't our fight. We run legitimate operations now. Construction, real estate, investment. We left the street wars behind. Why risk everything for 2 people we don't know? Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of history that Ji-hoon had never asked about but had always sensed. My mother cleaned offices in Gangnam, he said. Worked 3 jobs. Saved every one to keep me in school. When I was 12, her supervisor decided she owed him more than cleaning. When she refused, he beat her. Broke her arm. Told her if she reported him, she'd never work again. Ji-hoon had stopped looking at his tablet. She never reported him, Min-jae continued. She kept working. Kept getting hurt. Kept silent because she was afraid of deportation, of poverty, of men with power who faced no consequences. I watched her disappear piece by piece until there was nothing left but survival instinct and exhaustion. He turned to face his second-in-command directly. I was powerless then. I'm not powerless now. So no, Ji-hoon, we don't hand them back. We burn the system that thinks it can own them. Before Ji-hoon could respond, the lights flickered. Just once. Barely noticeable. Both men froze. Then came the sound, distant but unmistakable. Glass breaking. The sharp crack of controlled demolition. The clinic's front entrance, 2 floors below. Min-jae's phone erupted with alerts. Security breach. Multiple hostiles. Armed. Through the window at the end of the hallway, Min-jae caught movement. A sedan idling across the street, engine running, no plates visible. In the driver's seat, a figure watched the building with professional patience. Not reconnaissance anymore. Execution. Get them out, Min-jae said, his voice carrying the absolute calm of someone who'd drilled for this exact scenario. Service exit. Now. Ji-hoon was already moving, phone to his ear, backup protocols activating. Inside the room, Amara stood, terror flooding back into her eyes. From somewhere below came the unmistakable sound of automatic weapons fire. The hit had begun. They made it out through the service exit, barely. Min-jae's security protocols held long enough for evacuation, though the clinic would need a new front entrance and possibly a new first floor. 3 of the attackers were neutralized. 2 escaped. The message had been delivered on both sides. Now 72 hours later, Grace and Amara occupied a penthouse safe house in Gangnam that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a city that glittered like scattered diamonds. The furniture was minimalist and expensive, the kind that looked uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Security was invisible but omnipresent. Cameras disguised as smoke detectors, reinforced walls behind decorative panels, guards in the building lobby wearing suits that concealed body armor and tactical training. Amara stood at the window, barefoot on heated marble floors, pressing her hand against the glass like she was trying to touch the city lights. She wore new clothes now. Soft things purchased by Min-jae's assistant, tags removed, folded carefully on a chair she claimed as her territory. Her bruises were fading from purple to yellow-green, the visible timeline of healing written on her skin. "Are all the buildings yours?" she asked, not turning around. Min-jae sat at the dining table, laptop open, reading security reports that detailed the Bratva's escalating responses. They'd hit 2 of his construction sites. Nothing major, warning shots really. Testing his resolve, mapping his reactions, calculating the price of continued defiance. "Some of them," he answered. "Not all." "How do you know which ones?" "I pay attention." She turned to face him, head tilted with the unself-conscious curiosity of someone still learning how adults lied. "My teacher says paying attention is how you learn who to trust." "Your teacher is smart." "She also says powerful people are usually mean." Amara walked closer, small feet silent on expensive flooring. "Are you mean?" Min-jae closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. Most adults dismiss children's questions as naive. He'd learned that children asked the things adults were too afraid to voice. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "When I need to be. But not to me." "No. Not to you." She climbed onto the chair across from him, legs swinging, too short to reach the floor. For a moment she just studied him, his slicked hair, his expensive watch, the tattoos that crept above his collar like secrets refusing to stay buried. "Do bad men know when they're bad?" she asked finally. The question landed like a physical thing. Min-jae was quiet for a long moment, considering answers that wouldn't be lies but wouldn't destroy whatever strange trust they'd built in parking lots and broken apartments. "I think," he said carefully, "most bad men convince themselves they're doing what's necessary. They build stories where they're the hero, where their violence has purpose, where the people they hurt deserved it somehow." "Do you do that?" "I try not to." "So you know you're bad?" "I know what I've done. I know what it cost. I don't pretend it was anything else." Amara absorbed this, her expression serious in the way children looked when processing adult complexity. "My mum says knowing you're wrong is the first step to being right." "Your mum is also smart." "She's scared now though." Amara's voice dropped, small and uncertain. "She cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. Quiet crying, the kind where you try not to make noise." Before Min-jae could respond, Grace emerged from the bedroom. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand pressed to her ribs where they were still healing. The swelling in her face had gone down, but the bruises remained, a fading map of violence that would take weeks to completely disappear. She stopped when she saw them at the table, some protective instinct flaring. "Amara, come here." The tone was gentle but firm. Amara recognized it. The voice that meant now, not later, no arguments. She slid off the chair and crossed to her mother, who immediately positioned herself between daughter and Min-jae, the geometry of protection reasserting itself despite broken ribs and exhaustion. "I appreciate everything you've done," Grace said, her voice steady despite the fear Min-jae could see in her eyes. "The doctors, this place, the security. But I need to know who you are." "Really?" "You know who I am. I know you kicked in a door and saved us. I know you have men with guns and money and buildings." She paused. I also know that men tried to kill us in a hospital. That my daughter overheard you talking about wars and organizations and burning systems. So I'll ask again, who are you? Min-jae stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. He'd had this conversation before, with different people in different circumstances. It never got easier. My name is Kang Min-jae. I run one of the largest private security and investment firms in Seoul. Before that, I ran other things. Illegal things. I've hurt people. Ordered violence. Built an empire on foundations that wouldn't survive scrutiny. Grace's hand tightened on Amara's shoulder. The men who attacked the clinic, Min-jae continued. They're part of a trafficking network. Your boyfriend worked for them. By protecting you, I've interfered with their operations. That's made you valuable, as leverage, as message, as cost. So we're prisoners now, Grace said quietly. Just better dressed ones. You're protected. By a criminal. By someone who won't let them take you back. Grace pulled Amara closer, maternal instinct overriding gratitude. And when you decide we're too expensive to protect, when this war of yours gets too costly, what happens to us then? Min-jae had no answer that wouldn't sound like a promise he might not be able to keep. Grace saw his silence for what it was. Her expression shifted, from fear to decision, from gratitude to calculation. She'd survived this long by knowing when to run, when to hide, when to become invisible. Thank you for everything, she said, the words formal now distant. But I think we should leave. Maybe go to another city. Start over somewhere you and these Russians aren't. They'll find you, Min-jae said flatly. They're already looking. Then we'll keep moving. She turned away, guiding Amara back toward the bedroom, already planning escape routes from the man who'd saved them. Amara looked back over her shoulder, confusion and something like sadness in her eyes. The door closed. Min-jae stood alone in his expensive safe house, surrounded by protection that suddenly felt like a cage, and wondered if mercy always devoured itself this way. Min-jae didn't ask permission, didn't convene meetings or seek consensus. By dawn, 3 of Park Sung-ho's trafficking warehouses were burning. By noon, Bratva logistics coordinators had disappeared. Not killed, something worse. They'd been delivered to immigration authorities with complete documentation of their operations, bank records, photographs, testimony from victims who'd finally been offered protection that came with teeth. The message was surgical and absolute. You made this war. Now watch it consume you. Ji-hoon coordinated from a command center 3 blocks from the safe house, multiple screens tracking law enforcement responses, media coverage, and enemy communications. They're scrambling, he reported over encrypted channels. Park Sung-ho went dark. The Bratva are pulling assets back to defensive positions. You've hit them where they can't retaliate without exposing themselves. Good, Min-jae said. Keep the pressure. I want every safe house mapped, every route documented, every official on their payroll identified. Boss, this level of aggression, it's not sustainable. Eventually they'll adapt, and when they do, let them adapt. I want them bleeding resources, making mistakes, turning on each other. While Min-jae orchestrated calculated destruction, Amara woke screaming. Grace rushed to her daughter's side, finding her tangled in expensive sheets, eyes wide with terror that didn't recognize the safe room or the soft lighting or the absence of immediate danger. She was still in that apartment, still hearing fists on flesh, still running through parking lots where monsters wore human faces. Baby, you're safe, Grace whispered, pulling her close. You're safe now. But Amara's body remembered what her mind tried to forget. The shaking wouldn't stop. The tears came in waves that had no end. Fear had carved itself into her nervous system, and no amount of marble floors or armed guards could excavate it. In a warehouse across Seoul, one of Park Sung-ho's enforcers knelt on concrete, zip-tied and bleeding, while Min-jae's men asked questions he couldn't afford not to answer. The interrogation was efficient, documented, and utterly without mercy. Every name led to another address. Every address revealed another victim. The trafficking network unraveled in real time, pulled apart by professionals who'd learned their craft in rougher schools than the Bratva remembered. Min-jae had risen to power this way, by being more ruthless, more strategic, more willing to burn everything to achieve objectives others thought impossible. In his early 20s, he'd been muscle for a loan shark, collecting debts from people who'd run out of options. Then he'd been an enforcer, breaking bones to prove points. Then an operator, moving money and weapons and information through channels the law couldn't touch. By 30, he'd eliminated every rival who'd underestimated the quiet man with the slicked back hair and the careful violence. By 35, he'd legitimized enough of his empire to look respectable while keeping enough darkness to remain dangerous. But power had rules. And the first rule was trust. The second rule was, trust no one completely. Ji-hoon appeared at the safe house near midnight, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral in a way that made Min-jae's instincts scream warnings. "We have a problem," Ji-hoon said quietly. "Internal." Min-jae gestured for him to continue. "Someone leaked safe house locations to the Bratva 3 hours ago. Not just this one, all of them." The words landed like physics, inevitable and devastating. "Who?" "Kim Sang-woo. Your head of security." Min-jae's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A calculation running through variables, outcomes, costs. Sang-woo had been with him for 12 years. Had bled beside him. Had carried bodies and kept secrets and sworn oaths that sounded permanent. Why? Money. They offered him 5 million won and safe passage to Vladivostok. He took it. Where is he now? We're tracking him. He's running, but he doesn't know we know yet. Min-jae stood, movements controlled, purposeful. Secure the perimeter. Double the guards. Rotate positions every 30 minutes. If anyone approaches this building. The window exploded. Not gunfire. Shaped charge. Professional demolition creating entry rather than destruction. Before the glass finished falling, smoke grenades detonated in the room, filling the space with choking gray clouds that turned expensive furniture into abstract shadows. Grace screamed, pulling Amara toward the bedroom. Min-jae's training took over, gun drawn, body moving on instinct toward the threat. Through the smoke came figures in tactical gear, moving with precision that spoke of military background and recent rehearsal. 4 of them. Maybe 5. Hard to count through the chaos. "Get them out!" Min-jae shouted at Ji-hoon. "Service stairs now." Ji-hoon grabbed Grace's arm, pulling her toward the emergency exit. She stumbled, ribs screaming protest, but maternal fear overrode pain. She reached for Amara. The girl wasn't there. "Amara!" Grace's scream cut through smoke and gunfire. Through the haze, a figure in black tactical gear held the child, hand over her mouth, already moving back toward the shattered window where rappelling lines waited. Amara's eyes found Min-jae's across the chaos, wide, terrified, betrayed. She'd asked if bad men knew when they were bad. Now she was learning that bad men came in many forms. And sometimes the ones you trusted were the ones who sold you. Min-jae fired twice, controlled shots that dropped one attacker. But the others were already moving, coordinated extraction. The child disappearing through the window into a world where mercy was currency and innocence was leverage. By the time Min-jae reached the window, they were gone, rappelling down into waiting vehicles that peeled away with professional speed. Grace collapsed, her screaming raw and endless and utterly futile. Ji-hoon was already on his phone, activating protocols, mobilizing resources. But Min-jae just stood at the shattered window, watching taillights disappear into souls in different sprawl, and felt something he'd thought he'd killed years ago. Helplessness. The Bratva had her. And they'd used his own man to take her. The tracker embedded in Min-jae's jacket, the one Amara had been wearing since the parking lot, led them to Incheon's abandoned industrial district. Concrete skeletons of factories that had hemorrhaged jobs decades ago, left to rot beside waterways choked with chemical residue and forgotten ambition. The kind of place where screams echoed off rusted metal and nobody called the police because nobody lived close enough to care. Ji-hoon had assembled 20 men. Ex-military. Ex-police. The kind of professionals who understood that some operations happened outside legal frameworks and inside moral imperatives. They wore tactical gear without insignia, carried weapons without serial numbers, and asked no questions about jurisdiction or consequences. "We go in quiet," Ji-hoon briefed. "Extract the girl, eliminate threats, disappear before law enforcement arrives." Min-jae checked his weapon, a Glock 19, familiar weight, 15 rounds plus 1 chambered. "No," he said quietly. "We go in loud." "Boss, that violates every protocol we've." They took a child to make a point. "I'm going to make a better one." Grace stood beside the command vehicle, hands shaking, face pale. She'd refused to stay behind. refused safety while her daughter was in that building. Please, she whispered. Please bring her back. Min-jae met her eyes. I will. Or I won't come back either. The warehouse loomed against the night sky. 4 stories of industrial decay, windows shattered like missing teeth, graffiti covering surfaces in languages and symbols that marked territory nobody wanted. Lights glowed on the 2nd floor. Movement visible through broken glass. Sloppy. Arrogant. They thought their reputation was armor. They were wrong. Inside, Amara sat on a metal chair in a room that smelled like rust and old violence. Her wrists were zip-tied, but loosely. Whoever had restrained her hadn't expected a child to fight back. Around her, 4 men played cards and drank vodka from the bottle, occasionally glancing at her like she was inventory they were tired of guarding. She'd stopped crying an hour ago. Crying didn't help. Crying made them laugh. So instead she counted things. Ceiling tiles, 47. Light fixtures, 2 broken. Exit doors, 2, both locked from the outside. Her teacher had said paying attention was how you learned who to trust. Amara was learning a different lesson. Paying attention was how you survived. The door opened. A man entered, older gray hair, expensive suit that looked wrong in this place. Behind him, someone else. Someone Amara recognized. The boyfriend. The one who'd beaten her mother. His face was healed now, the swelling gone, but his eyes held the same cruelty, the same confidence of someone who'd learned that violence had no consequences if you knew the right people. You recognize him? The older man asked in accented Korean. Your mother's friend? Amara said nothing. He tells me you're worth negotiating for. That the chairman has developed a sentimental attachment. The older man, Dimitri, though Amara didn't know his name, smiled without warmth. I personally think sentiment is expensive weakness. But perhaps we'll test the theory. Grace's ex-boyfriend crouched in front of Amara, close enough that she could smell alcohol on his breath. You should have minded your own business, little girl. Should have stayed quiet like your mother learned to. Amara looked at him with eyes that had learned too much too young. He's coming, she said quietly. And when he gets here, you're going to wish you'd stayed in that apartment. The boyfriend raised his hand, old habits, old patterns, but Dimitri stopped him with a gesture. Patience. She's more useful undamaged. That's when the windows exploded. Not shaped charges this time. Flashbangs. Concussion grenades. Min-jae's team breaching from 3 entry points simultaneously, overwhelming force meeting surprised resistance. The room erupted into chaos. Gunfire, shouting, smoke filling the space like fog rolling in from forgotten seas. Min-jae came through the 2nd floor window on a rappelling line, gun raised, moving with the precision of someone who'd breached 1,000 rooms and survived them all. He dropped 2 of Dimitri's men before his boots touched concrete. A third raised his weapon. Ji-hoon's sniper round took him from across the street. Amara didn't scream. She'd learned that survivors stayed quiet and watched for opportunities. Grace burst through the door behind Min-jae's team. Ignoring protocols, ignoring safety, maternal instinct overriding everything else. She saw her daughter. She saw her ex-boyfriend reaching for a weapon. She picked up a length of rebar from the floor and swung it like she'd been saving the motion for years. The impact was solid, final. The boyfriend dropped, unconscious or dead, the specifics suddenly irrelevant. Grace stood over him, chest heaving, the rebar still gripped in white-knuckled hands. That's for every time you made her cry, she whispered. Dimitri backed toward a rear exit, hands raised, calculating. Chairman Kong. We can still negotiate. The girl for territory. Money. Whatever you. No, Min-jae said, his voice carrying absolute finality. He raised his weapon. Dimitri's expression shifted from calculation to realization to fear in the space of a heartbeat. You're starting a war you can't win. The Bratva has infrastructure, connections, resources. Then I'll burn all of it. You'll be hunted. They'll never stop. They'll. Min-jae fired twice. Center mass. Professional. Final. Dimitri collapsed, surprise frozen on his face like he'd miscalculated a math problem and realized it too late. The warehouse fell silent except for Grace's sobbing as she cut through Amara's restraints and pulled her daughter close, checking for injuries, whispering apologies and promises and prayers all mixed together into the language mothers speak when they've almost lost everything. Ji-hoon appeared at Min-jae's shoulder. Boss, we need to move. Police response in 8 minutes. Min-jae holstered his weapon, staring at Dimitri's body. The choice was made. Not negotiation. Not compromise. Complete annihilation of everyone who'd thought a child was leverage. Burn it, he said quietly. All of it. Every Bratva operation in Seoul. Every safe house, every route, every connection. I want them extinct by sunrise. Yeon hesitated. That's a declaration of total war. Good. They'll understand the terms clearly. Behind them, Amara looked up at Min-jae with eyes that had seen too much, but somehow still held trust. You came, she whispered. I promised I would. Outside, sirens began their approach. But Min-jae wasn't running anymore. He was hunting. The war lasted 48 hours. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just systematic elimination executed with the precision of someone who understood that chaos was temporary, but documentation was forever. Min-jae's team hit 17 locations simultaneously. Safe houses burned. Bank accounts froze. Corrupt officials received anonymous packages containing evidence they couldn't deny, photographs, wire transfers, testimonies from victims who'd finally been offered immunity and protection that came with legal weight. The Bratva's sole infrastructure didn't collapse. It was dissected, piece by piece, connection by connection, until nothing remained but scattered operators fleeing to ports and airports, trying to disappear before the net closed completely. Park Sung-ho was found in a shipping container at Busan port, surrounded by cash and forged documents, waiting for passage to Manila that would never arrive. Immigration authorities arrested him. The evidence was overwhelming. The victims were numerous. His trial would be public, painful, and permanent. But Grace's ex-boyfriend, the man who'd started everything by raising his fist in a stolen apartment, he wasn't arrested. He was delivered. Min-jae had him brought to an empty warehouse in Suwon, the kind of place that had witnessed 1,000 endings and would witness 1,000 more. No audience. No recording. Just 3 people in a room that smelled like old concrete and older sins. The boyfriend was conscious, zip-tied to a chair, his earlier arrogance replaced by the kind of fear that came from finally understanding consequences. Grace stood 10 feet away, Amara beside her, both watching. Min-jae approached slowly, each step deliberate. You have 2 choices, he said quietly. You can confess everything to the prosecutors. Every victim, every location, every name. You can spend the rest of your life in a cell where people know exactly what you did. The man's breath came quick and shallow. Or you can refuse. And I'll ensure you never hurt anyone again. Min-jae's tone didn't change. Didn't threaten. Just stated physics. You won't die. But you'll wish you had. Every single day. The boyfriend looked at Grace, at Amara, some desperate calculation trying to find leverage, manipulation, the tools that had always worked before. Grace stepped forward. Choose the first one, she said, her voice steady. Not because I forgive you. I don't. But because my daughter needs to see that the system works. That monsters face justice. That running to parking lots and begging strangers isn't the only way to survive. She crouched to meet his eyes, close enough that he couldn't look away. You taught me I was powerless, she continued. You were wrong. I'm taking that power back. Every woman you hurt is taking it back. And you're going to help us. He broke. Not dramatically. Just deflated. The confession came in stuttering fragments. Addresses, names, dates. Everything prosecutors would need to dismantle what remained of the network. When it was finished, Min-jae made the call. Police arrived 15 minutes later. The boyfriend was taken away in handcuffs, and Grace didn't watch him go. She was already leading Amara toward the exit. Toward whatever came next, toward a future that suddenly seemed possible. But the victory had cost. Min-jae's left shoulder was bleeding through his shirt, a graze from the warehouse breach, shallow but persistent. He'd ignored it during the 48 hours of coordinated violence, adrenaline and purpose overriding pain. Now, standing in the empty warehouse, the wound made itself known with throbbing insistence. Amara noticed first. You're hurt, she said, her voice small with concern. Min-jae glanced down, seeing blood spreading across expensive fabric like an abstract painting. It's nothing. You're bleeding. I've bled before. She walked over to him, reached up, and took his hand. Small fingers wrapping around larger ones, Human connection that felt more significant than it should. Bad men don't bleed for other people, she said quietly. My teacher said heroes bleed. Maybe you're not as bad as you think. Min-jae looked down at this child who'd asked impossible questions, and somehow survived impossible circumstances. Heroes don't do what I did this week. What did you do? I erased people, burned organizations, destroyed livelihoods. Some of those people probably had families, reasons, stories that would make them seem less monstrous if I'd listened. Did you listen to him? Amara gestured toward where her mother's ex-boyfriend had sat. Did you listen to the men who hurt us? Yes. Did it change anything? Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. No. Then maybe listening isn't always the right thing. She squeezed his hand. Maybe sometimes protecting people is more important than understanding monsters. Grace appeared beside them, her expression complicated. Gratitude mixed with residual fear, respect mixed with uncertainty. The prosecutor wants to meet, she said. They're offering witness protection. New identities. A fresh start somewhere far from here. Will you take it? Min-jae asked. Grace looked at her daughter, then back at him. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to run until geography feels like safety. But another part. She hesitated. Another part knows that running from one cage into another isn't freedom. It's just better scenery. Then stay, Min-jae said simply. I own buildings. I employ people. I can ensure you're safe, employed, free to build whatever life you want. No dates. No obligations. Just existence without looking over your shoulder. Why? Grace asked, the question carrying weight. Why do all this for us? Min-jae looked at Amara, still holding his hand, still trusting despite everything she'd seen. Because someone should have done it for my mother. And because some sins can be balanced, even if they can't be erased. Ji-hoon entered, tablet in hand. It's confirmed. The last brought Vassell and Seoul just boarded a flight to Vladivostok. Their infrastructure is gone. The trafficking network is documented, prosecuted, finished. Min-jae nodded once. The system that had allowed abuse to flourish in shadows, the corrupt officials, the complicit enforcers, the network of silence and violence, it was erased. Not perfectly, not permanently, but thoroughly enough that rebuilding would take years, and the cost would be remembered. Amara looked up at him, her small hand still wrapped around his bleeding one. Thank you, she whispered. And for the first time in 2 decades, Min-jae felt like maybe, just maybe, the devil had protected something worth saving. 6 months later, Grace worked the morning shift at a cafe in Jeju City, an island far enough from Seoul that geography felt like forgiveness. The cafe overlooked the ocean, all weathered wood and salt-worn windows, the kind of place where tourists ordered overpriced lattes and locals nursed black coffee while reading newspapers that covered mainland politics with comfortable distance. She wore her hair differently now. Shorter. Lighter. A small act of reinvention that signaled transformation without announcing it. Her ribs had healed. The bruises had faded to memory. She moved through the cafe with the careful confidence of someone learning that normalcy was possible. That mornings could pass without violence. That exhaustion could come from honest work instead of survival. Her name wasn't Grace anymore. At least not officially. The witness protection documents listed her as Kim Sun-hee, a widow from Busan starting over after her husband's death. Close enough to truth that the lie didn't require constant maintenance. Far enough that anyone searching old records would find dead ends and closed cases. Amara, now called Ji-woo in her school records, sat in a 4th grade classroom 3 blocks away, her desk positioned near the window where sunlight painted patterns on notebooks and textbooks. She'd grown 2 inches, cut her hair, started wearing glasses that made her look older, more studious, less like the terrified child who'd crashed into a parking lot begging strangers for salvation. The nightmare still came. Not every night anymore, but often enough that her mother kept a second blanket ready and knew the signs. The quickened breathing, the small sounds of distress, the way trauma announced itself even in sleep. The school counselor was patient, specialized in children who'd witnessed violence, understood that healing wasn't linear and trust wasn't automatic. But Amara was laughing again. Small things, jokes with classmates, silly moments during lunch, the ordinary magic of childhood reasserting itself despite the weight of what she carried. She'd made a friend, a quiet girl named Mincio who shared her love of drawing, and asked no questions about why Amara sometimes flinched at loud noises. Progress, the counselor called it. Not recovery. Not yet. Just forward motion through the wreckage. Min-jae watched from a black sedan parked 2 streets over, engine idling, heater running against the island's damp chill. He visited once a month, never staying long, never making contact. Just confirming they existed, they breathed, they continued in safety that cost him nothing but attention. Ji-hoon sat in the passenger seat, tablet balanced on his lap, monitoring feeds that tracked potential threats. Old enemies surfacing, new organizations probing for weaknesses, the constant mathematics of maintained protection. All clear, he reported. No unusual activity. No surveillance. They're invisible. Good. You know they don't need you anymore, Ji-hoon said carefully. The witness protection is solid. The Bratva is scattered. Park Sung-ho is serving consecutive life sentences. The boyfriend hanged himself in prison 3 months ago. Closure, as civilians call it. Min-jae said nothing, watching the school entrance where children poured out in chaotic streams, backpacks bouncing, voices carrying that particular frequency of youthful energy that adults forgot they'd once possessed. Amara emerged with her friend, both girls laughing about something, their faces bright with the kind of joy that seemed miraculous after everything. They walked toward the cafe where Grace would be finishing her shift, the geography of their new life mapped in safe distances and familiar routines. Amara paused as if sensing something. She turned, scanning the street with the hypervigilance that trauma installed, and time couldn't completely uninstall. Her eyes found the sedan, though she couldn't possibly see through tinted windows, couldn't possibly know who watched from inside. She smiled. Small. Quick. Then turned back to her friend, continuing toward the cafe. 10 minutes later, Min-jae's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, probably a burner, purchased for this specific purpose, to be discarded immediately after. It was a photo. Amara and her mother, standing outside the cafe, holding coffee cups, smiling in that self-conscious way people smiled when taking selfies they weren't entirely comfortable with. Behind them, the ocean stretched toward horizons that held no threats, no violence, no men with fists and bottles and entitlement. Below the photo 3 words. Thank you for stopping. Not thank you for saving us. Not thank you for protection. Just stopping. For being the first person who didn't walk past, didn't look away, didn't decide that other people's nightmares weren't his responsibility. Min-jae stared at the photo for a long moment. He should delete it. Operational security, clean digital footprints, the discipline that had kept him alive and free for 2 decades. Evidence was liability. Sentiment was weakness. He saved it instead. Moved it to a folder labeled with nonsense characters, encrypted 3 times over, the digital equivalent of a locked drawer holding photographs too important to display, but too meaningful to destroy. His one proof of redemption. His evidence that power could occasionally bend toward justice instead of just consolidating itself. Boss. Yeon prompted. Orders. Min-jae started the engine. Back to Seoul. We're done here. The sedan pulled away from the curb, blending into island traffic, just another vehicle carrying people toward destinations that mattered only to them. In the rearview mirror, the cafe grew smaller, then disappeared around a corner, and with it the visible proof that some interventions changed trajectories, that some violence prevented worse violence, that mercy could survive even in men who'd long since stopped believing they deserved it. Grace would rebuild her life in increments, months becoming years, fear becoming memory, survival becoming existence, becoming something that might eventually resemble peace. Amara would grow up with scars, yes, but also with the knowledge that someone had stopped. That monsters could be challenged. That the world occasionally produced protectors even when it seemed designed to produce only predators. And Min-jae would return to Seoul, to his empire of questionable morality and careful violence, carrying the understanding that redemption didn't erase the ledger, but could occasionally add entries to the other column. Some monsters protect what the world ignores. And sometimes, that has to be enough. If this story moved you in any way, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. And I'd really love to hear from you. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Drop a comment below and share where you're watching from. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until the next story.